spending a lot of time in the emergency department in the MCV hospital. That's what I'm doing now. So I haven't had so much time, but I've thought about it. And, I know I'm not as talkative as Father Bio, so this probably won't be as long. But I have a video that I'd like to show everybody that's been significant to me and I think can be pretty valuable. So I was going to start with the concept of supporting. Supporting means, to hold up, but generally doesn't mean to have a complete foundation or to have to hold up by itself. Supporting means to help, to lend aid to. So in practical terms, when you're supporting another person, usually in a specific endeavor, it's something they can do, but at least in my experience, we don't always know how much we can do. And a lot of times it takes support to realize our own potential. And I'll get into it a little more, but support often isn't physical. Usually when people need support, it isn't like I need help doing something. A lot of times it's I need help recognizing that I'm going to be okay, recognizing that things are going to turn out, knowing that I'm loved. These are things that everybody needs support with, whatever they're doing. So I was going to read a piece of scripture about why we support each other. This is from the Pyeongwagyeong, page 71, the principle of existing for the sake of others. Now, this whole message is going to be from my perspective, so I'm a newlywed, I'm still in the process of uniting with my wife, but we're still pretty lovey-dovey, so our new romantic love makes it easy to gloss over things that might become bigger problems in the future. And also I'm a man, so I'm going to be taking a man's perspective and speaking from that viewpoint, so the one man in the audience might be able to connect with that. But also I think I could appreciate it if the women in the audience try to understand what men are going through. And I think if you can have compassion for that, it can help you grow closer to men as well. So this is the principle of existing for the sake of others. If human beings had taken after God, if God had been able to educate them, and if they lived for the sake of God, the realization of the ideal world would have been possible. Unfortunately, human beings did not do so, and instead centered on themselves, emphasized their identity as separate from God. Then the fall took place. The Bible clearly describes this. Therefore, if we were to draw a formal conclusion now, it would be the principle that all ideal created beings existed for the sake of others. The model is true parents, parents who are born for their children, who live for their children, and who would die for their children. Such parents are parents of true love and true ideals. They are the parents of true happiness and the subject of true peace for their children. What would true filial children be like? They would be born for their parents and not for themselves, live for their parents and not for themselves, and would give their lives for their parents. Then what is the purpose behind a man coming into being? It's not for himself. He came into being for a woman. When a woman dresses in nice clothes and puts cosmetics on her face, for whom is she doing so? Is there any woman that does this for herself? Unfortunately, probably. She does so because of a man. The purpose of the birth of a woman is a man. They exist for one another, so the moment that they think they were born for themselves, problems arise. Then what is an ideal husband like? Would an ideal husband say that his wife must always live for his sake? No. Where can you find a true husband and a true wife? In the case of the man, only when he knows that he was born for his wife, is living for his wife, and is ready to die for his wife, can his wife say, "Oh, he is my ideal husband, and the eternal and unchanging subject partner of my love." Therefore, only a wife with such a husband can claim, "I am a happy wife." And we truly can say that only such a family can be a family of true peace. On the other hand, we know only too well that if a woman's husband says that he has to live for his sake, she will be unhappy. Based on this viewpoint, we have to praise God as the King of wisdom for instituting this principle of existing for the sake of others as the origin of creation of the universe. Here we have reached one conclusion. At this point, we can establish the formula that only where one exists for the sake of others can true love, true ideals, true happiness, and true peace begin. If God has established such a formula in the creation of the universe, through this formula alone can the love, the ideals, the happiness, and the peace desired by God become possible. Otherwise, obviously, we have to conclude that they cannot come about. So based on this reading, we can understand that people need support because that's how and why we were made. Men and women were made to complete and complement each other. And that also means that men and women are incomplete living alone. Now, we build foundations and we try to develop our personal character so that we can be prepared to receive a partner. And oftentimes, if people go into relationships unprepared, that can lead to problems down the road. I can speak to this from personal experience. The first time I got married, it didn't work out, unfortunately. And I think a lot of that is because I wasn't prepared as an individual. I didn't understand how to support my wife. And I think even more importantly, as a man, I had pride and I tried to keep independence, and I didn't understand how to be supported by my partner. So when I found out that I had to give a sermon, I thought, a week's not enough time, how am I going to do this? And so, like a lot of things, I put it off. But I have a wife who supports me, and sometimes support is asking her, "Can you come up with a few songs for us to sing this morning?" And she did. She gave me some ideas, and I thought they were pretty good, so let's give her a hand for choosing the songs this morning. Obviously, this is something I could have done myself, but knowing that she's doing something with me means more than, I think, the actual doing of it. It means that she cares. It means that she's invested in the things I do. It means that she loves me. And I appreciate that. It also means that on Thursday and Friday night, she asked me, "So, are you working on the sermon?" Not to nag, but because she knows this is important to me and that I'm only putting it off because I'm stressed about it, because I don't know what I'm going to say. And she didn't say, "You have to do it." She just reminded me that this is maybe something that you're trying not to think about, so maybe think about it. And eventually I did get around to putting thoughts together for what I wanted to say in my sermon. But at the same time, I appreciated her support in knowing what I needed to do and when I needed to do it. And that's also love. Fortunately, I've had a lot of experience supporting her as well. As you know, that she was recently appointed the Vice President for the Women's Federation for World Peace. And before that, she was a nanny and had recently stepped up from an internship in a nonprofit organization. So from going to 2 part-time jobs to a leader that people are looking up to, someone that's being groomed to be the president of Women's Federation for America, is a huge step. And obviously it's something that she was concerned about, and something she didn't know she could do. And I felt like it was my job as her husband to tell her, I love you, and it's going to be fine. She has been training for this her whole life. When I asked her, even years ago, what she wanted to do with her life, she said she wanted to work internationally. She wanted to work for a big NGO. She said she wanted a chance to use the Korean she'd learned. And she'd gotten a master's degree, and at the time she had no idea what she was going to do with it. And it all came together, and she was hesitating. And that's natural. It's scary, it's intimidating. But I could see that this is what she wanted. This is what she's always wanted. And she didn't know if she could do it. But my way of supporting is to show her that I believe in her, and I think she can be a great leader. That she has great potential, and this is something she can be really passionate about. So the way I support isn't to tell her, you should do this. It's not to try to take the decision away from her. It's just to give her the love to make the decision that is right for her. To help her make a good decision from a place of love and support, and not from a place of fear. Because unfortunately in this world, a lot of people act out of fear, primarily. Because a lot of people have bad experiences. It's a harsh world, and if you let yourself be open, it's really easy to be brokenhearted. So it's a lot easier at times to just close yourself off, don't let anything touch you, and just be invincible, just be completely dependent on yourself. Because the world teaches you that if you depend on other people, they will let you down. And I think building a relationship, coming together, especially as husband and wife, is the process of learning to lean on each other and learning to depend on each other, letting yourself be open to being hurt. Unfortunately, we're all flawed people, so you're still going to get hurt. You're going to have to let yourself be open to being hurt, get hurt, and pick yourself up and try to connect again. Because what we all really want is to be connected to other people, and it hurts to have that connection severed. And I learned that from personal experience. I had to get divorced, and I didn't like it one bit, but through that experience I learned that I wasn't prepared, that basically I couldn't do everything on my own, that I could follow all the rules and it wasn't enough. You have to live with your whole heart, and you have to be able to connect that heart with someone else for you to form a lasting bond. Otherwise, what is it really that's keeping you together? So I feel like that's the biggest barrier that keeps people from being able to support one another. That you feel like if you want to support someone and you want to express your love and your heart to them, you want to show kindness to them, if they reject that support, that feels terrible. You come back, what you learn from that is, why would I want to support someone? Unfortunately, especially as a man, I want to take care of everything. I want to take care of my wife. I don't want her to have to worry about anything. And especially, I don't want her to worry about having to support me. Because in this culture especially, being vulnerable and letting yourself open to other people, letting other people know what problems you have, what support you need, that can be interpreted as weakness. To let your partner know that you don't have all the answers, that you're afraid, that this seems too big. That's admitting that you can't take care of it all by yourself. And boys are taught growing up that you have to be a man. You can't cry. You can't be weak. You have to be strong. And that, I think, deeply interferes with being able to get close to another person. So one thing I learned recovering from my divorce was that I can't do it by myself. I am a flawed individual. I'm not perfect, but I am still worthy of love. I still need love. And that in order to go out and look for it again, I have to know what I want. And I have to be willing to put myself out there to get it. So the concept of vulnerability being something that is necessary for fulfillment and for love is something that I thought was expressed very well in a video I saw online. So I'd like to share that with you. Welcome. Good morning. Good morning.
So I'll start with this. A couple of years ago, an event planner called me because I was going to do a speaking event. And she called and she said, I'm really struggling with how to write about you on the little flyer. And I thought, well, what's the struggle? And she said, well, I saw you speak, and I'm going to call you a researcher, I think, but I'm afraid if I call you a researcher, no one will come because they'll think you're boring and irrelevant. And I was like, okay. And she said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're a storyteller. So I think what I'll do is just call you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me was like, you're going to call me a what? And she said, I'm going to call you a storyteller. And I was like, oh, why not Magic Pixie? I was like, let me think about this for a second. And so I tried to call deep on my courage. And I thought, I am a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. And maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. So I said, you know what? Why don't you just say I'm a researcher storyteller? And she went, there's no such thing. So I'm a researcher storyteller. And I'm going to talk to you today. We're talking about expanding perception. And so I want to talk to you and tell some stories about a piece of my research that fundamentally expanded my perception and really actually changed the way that I live and love and work and parent. And this is where my story starts. When I was a young researcher, a doctoral student, my first year I had a research professor who said to us, here's the thing, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist. And I thought he was just sweet-talking me. I was like, really? And he's like, absolutely. So you have to understand that I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in social work, and I was getting my PhD in social work. So my entire academic career was surrounded by people who kind of believed in the life's messy, love it, and I'm more the life's messy, clean it up, organize it, and put it into a bento box. And so to think that I had found my way, to found a career that takes me, really one of the big sayings in social work is lean into the discomfort of the work. And I'm like, knock discomfort upside the head and move it over and get all A's. That was my mantra. So I was very excited about this. And so I thought, you know what? This is the career for me because I am interested in some messy topics, but I want to be able to make them not messy. I want to understand them. I want to hack into these things that I know are important and lay the code out for everyone to see. So where I started was with connection, because by the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you talk to people who work in social justice and mental health and abuse and neglect. What we know is that connection, the ability to feel connected, is neurobiologically, that's how we're wired, it's why we're here. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to start with connection. Well, you know that situation where you get an evaluation from your boss and she tells you 37 things that you do really awesome and one thing that you have an opportunity for growth. And all you can think about is that opportunity for growth, right? Well, apparently this is the way my work went as well, because when you ask people about love, they tell you about heartbreak. When you ask people about belonging, they'll tell you their most excruciating experiences of being excluded. And when you ask people about connection, the stories they told me were about disconnection. So very quickly, really about 6 weeks into this research, I ran into this unnamed thing that absolutely unraveled connection in a way that I didn't understand or had never seen. And so I pulled back out of the research and thought, I need to figure out what this is. And it turned out to be shame. And shame is really easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that if other people know it or see it, that I won't be worthy of connection? The things I can tell you about it, it's universal. We all have it. The only people who don't experience shame have no capacity for human empathy or connection. No one wants to talk about it, and the less you talk about it, the more you have it. What underpinned this shame, this I'm not good enough, which we all know that feeling. I'm not blank enough. I'm not thin enough, rich enough, beautiful enough, smart enough, promoted enough. The thing that underpinned this was excruciating vulnerability. This idea of, in order for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. And you know how I feel about vulnerability. I hate vulnerability. And so I thought, this is my chance to beat it back with my measuring stick. I'm going in, I'm going to figure this stuff out, I'm going to spend a year, I'm going to totally deconstruct shame, I'm going to understand how vulnerability works, and I'm going to outsmart it. So I was ready, and I was really excited. As you know, it's not going to turn out well. You know this. So I could tell you a lot about shame, but I'd have to borrow everyone else's time. But here's what I can tell you that it boils down to. And this may be one of the most important things that I've ever learned in the decade of doing this research. My 1 year has turned into 6 years, thousands of stories, hundreds of long interviews, focus groups. At one point, people were sending me journal pages and sending me their stories, thousands of pieces of data, and 6 years. And I kind of got a handle on it. I kind of understood this is what shame is, this is how it works. I wrote a book, I published a theory, but something was not okay. And what it was is that if I roughly took the people I interviewed and divided them into people who really have a sense of worthiness, that's what this comes down to, a sense of worthiness. They have a strong sense of love and belonging. And folks who struggle for it, and folks who are always wondering if they're good enough. There was only one variable that separated the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and the people who really struggle for it, and that was the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe they're worthy of love and belonging. That's it. They believe they're worthy. And to me, the hard part of the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we're not worthy of connection. Was something that personally and professionally I felt like I needed to understand better. So what I did is I took all of the interviews where I saw worthiness, where I saw people living that way, and just looked at those. What do these people have in common? And I have a slight office supply addiction, but it's another talk. So I had a manila notebook, a manila folder, and I had a Sharpie. And I was like, what am I going to call this research? And the first words that came to my mind were wholehearted. These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the manila folder. And I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern? My husband left town with the kids because I always go into this kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing where I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, it's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And so these folks had, very simply, the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with other people if we can't treat ourselves kindly. And the last was they had connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were, which is, you have to absolutely do that for connection. The other thing that they had in common was this. They fully embraced vulnerability. They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't talk about vulnerability being comfortable, nor did they really talk about it being excruciating, as I had heard it earlier in the shame interviewing. They just talked about it being necessary. They talked about the willingness to say, I love you first. The willingness to do something where there are no guarantees. The willingness to breathe through waiting for the doctor to call after your mammogram. The willing to invest in a relationship that may or may not work out. They thought this was fundamental. I personally thought it was betrayal. I could not believe I had pledged allegiance to research, where our job, the definition of research is to control and predict, to study phenomenon for the explicit reason to control and predict. And now my my mission to control and predict had turned up the answer that the way to live is with vulnerability.